But just take us back to the beginning. It was quite an implausible start for a future drugs baron. What kind of world were you born into?
I was born into a very, very working class, small mining village in the South Wales valleys, where there weren't any drugs whatsoever, other than alcohol, which I embraced completely. And then, for some reason or other, the headmaster of the school thought, because I was quite good at passing examinations, that I should apply for Oxford University, which was fairly unheard of in that small area. And I did, and to my astonishment, I got into Oxford, and I suppose I've been living off it ever since, some sort of way.
Yes, no, I was going to say, with the exceptionalism of getting from Wales into Oxford from a working class background in the 60s, almost meant your future life had to be exceptional in some way to live up to that.
Yes, and I absolutely hated it at first. You know, I felt so much like a fish out of water there. I mean, I definitely didn't belong there. I was homesick for at least a month. But eventually I got used to it. And as you pointed out, that's where I first smoked cannabis, so I owe it.
So, can you tell us a little bit about that first experience with drugs?
Yes, sure. A friend of mine had been rusticated, which is an Oxford term for being expelled, I suppose, for a certain time from Oxford. And he used that year of rustication very sensibly and travelled the world. And he'd come back to visit a few of his friends, and he had some keef, Moroccan keef with him, which is a little bit of grass, really. Passed the joint to me. I asked, what is this? Keef. I'd heard of it, yes, but I'd never tried it before. I tried it, and well, three things happened, really. One, that the music that was playing, which is a track I knew, it was Please, Please, Please by James Brown. I knew the track very well, but suddenly it seemed as if I was hearing things for the first time in that track that I must have played 300 times or something a week before or so. And then the other thing I noticed was that I found, well, I laughed a lot more. I was giggling and I was laughing, and also was able to provide a justification for the laughter by the things that were said. I didn't seem to be sort of ridiculous attack of the giggles. This was genuinely appreciating the humour. And so that was the first joint, and after that I did what I think, looking back, was an entirely rational reaction. I smoked another one, and another one, and another one, and just ended up being completely off my tits 24 hours a day. But very happy 24 hours a day. So that was my first experience with it. I just loved its effect. Preferred it to, well, I was only used to alcohol then, preferred it to alcohol.
Okay, and it's quite a jump, but at what point did you realise that drug smuggling would be an option?
Not immediately. It was a very gradual process, really. I just wanted to try more and more dope. I wanted to try different varieties of cannabis. I wanted to smoke more cannabis. So I did the usual thing, bought a few for my friends, a few ounces for my friends, which was enough to support my smoking habit for a while. But I quite liked being that sort of small-time dealer, because suddenly I was invited to lots of parties and things like that. And simply because I was a dealer, there was no other reason. And suddenly started making more money than my contemporaries, which was also important for my self-confidence. Still hadn't become a smuggler, but I became a bigger and bigger dealer as the years went on, and became a wholesaler of cannabis. Moved to London, became a wholesaler of cannabis. Became a big wholesaler of cannabis eventually, and if you're a big wholesaler of cannabis, you eventually need smugglers, because they need big wholesalers of cannabis in order to turn what they've got into money. So I met smugglers and became very attracted to that profession. So I became a cannabis smuggler. Starting off quite small, couple.
Kicking off now.
Jesus. And became rather a successful cannabis smuggler. And have I answered the question? Let's go back.
Yeah, so this is just a very brief interlude. I was actually robbed a week ago. I don't want any sympathy. I just have to say that when Howard got here and I was having a coffee with him, I got a phone call from an unknown number saying, "Is that Alex Klineberg?" I said, "Yes." I said, "This is the police." Oh, shit. Just to let you know, we haven't been able to find the people who robbed you. And I'm thinking, Jesus, you sat with Howard Marks. 5 minutes later, you get an anonymous phone call from a police officer. Anyway, so, yes. So I believe it was your first smuggle in Germany. You'd gone to visit a friend who was incarcerated.
Yes, I mean that led to my first smuggling experience. I had a friend who was a smuggler and who used to supply me with the stuff for wholesaling, and we were friends. And he disappeared once on an obvious cannabis trip in Germany, I think between Switzerland and Germany. And his wife called me up and said, "Howard, this might sound strange, but you were the straightest person we know," because I was still pursuing my studies. "Would you please go out and try and find him a lawyer?" So that was my first experience with smugglers. And then there were a number of people who wanted to know if this smuggling friend of mine had talked or grasped or given any information away or anything. So they met me, talked to me, and then asked if I would step into my fellow smugglers' shoes. So I said, "Yeah, of course." So then I started smuggling.
Okay, and at what point did this sort of small-scale smuggling get big?
When I started importing massive amounts of hashish into Ireland, I think that's when it started.
Yes, and you were working with the IRA at the time, weren't you? Collaborating. How did you get involved with the IRA?
Yes, I mean, I have to say before going any further that the person who I thought was a member of the IRA is actually the only person ever that the IRA have found it necessary to say he wasn't a member of the IRA. But I didn't even say that about Margaret Thatcher. No, I can't use that as an excuse, and as you can imagine, I come under a lot of fire for having worked with the IRA, but it probably wasn't the IRA. I'm not going to argue with the IRA. He said he was, I believed he was. And well, I suppose in many ways it was part of a standard left-wing agenda in those days. I mean, we were against the war in Vietnam, we were against racism, we were against homophobia, we were definitely sympathetic to the cause of the working class minority in Northern Ireland. It wasn't an identification of religion as far as I was concerned, or an identification of nationality. I'm not Catholic, I'm Welsh, not Irish. It was a class identification, really. I think we felt we were on the side of the downtrodden, and perhaps also in a stoned kind of way. I thought, well, it's got to be better that the fuckers bring in dope rather than arms. It's got to be better for everyone concerned that they smuggle hash rather than arms. It's got to be a step in the right direction, justified it that way.
Okay, and I believe that at the time that you were collaborating with the chappie from the IRA or otherwise, you were also doing big deals from Pakistan. Was that with a minor Afghan prince, or was that with, how did you get involved with these big deals coming out of Kabul, was it?
Yes, I did get involved with big deals coming from Kabul, but the first that I was involved with the actual smuggling was into Ireland. Before then, I knew a variety of Pakistani diplomats who had their own ways of getting hashish from Kabul or Pakistan into Germany largely, but any European country, they had their own ways of getting it in through diplomatic immunity. So I'd often sort of be meeting them in Germany, taking it from them and redistributing it. So that was going on anyway, and I think the person you're referring to was Mohammed Durrani, who was the king of Afghanistan's grandson. So
Okay.
quite a good connection.
Yes, and in the book you describe and seeing it in the movie, one of the most exhilarating things to watch is when you're going through border after border in Europe with a car that's full of copious amounts of drugs. And I think, well, I know that Rhys Ifans' character in the film describes it as like an asexual orgasm. When you get through the border and you're like, am I going to be like 14 years in the slammer for this? No, apparently not. I got through. I mean, what was that? Must have been exciting. The buzz.
It's almost like a religious flash, you know. I mean, yes, asexual orgasm for sure, and some sort of enlightenment that they felt. And of course, I miss it. I miss those days terribly. The nearest thing to it that I experience these days is stage fright, you know. And of course, looking like a plonker in front of a couple of hundred people, you know, it doesn't carry the same sort of thing as like spending the rest of your life in Nick, but I still, you know, feel safe.
And I believe that you were at one point smuggling drugs into America, which was the big market, still the biggest drug market in the world, where you were actually putting drugs into, say, was it Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin's tour gear without them knowing?
Yes, it was Pink Floyd's, but not Led Zeppelin's.
Okay, they're such nice middle-class boys, Pink Floyd, aren't they? They had no idea, did they?
They had no idea it was happening, though. I met Dave Gilmour, you know, a few times recently, and he said, yeah, of course I knew it was happening. Shh, Dave. I mean, we figured they were making enough money anyway, you know. So that, yeah. And British bands were very popular in America at that time. And at that time, the markup between price of hashish in Europe and America was about 300%, so it was a worthwhile smuggling opportunity. It was an arrangement I did with the road managers, and yeah, I don't think they did know about it.
Okay, and so, as I understand, the first Pink Floyd themed smuggle, did that go wrong when one of the roadies left a mic or an amp and American Customs basically figured out what was going on?
Yes, I mean, that's correct. I mean, we did about 7 loads, I think, successfully. And at some point, about halfway through those 7 loads, we suddenly realized we didn't have to be associated with the real band. You know, we could just pretend, you know, make up a band's name, which we did. And rather provocatively and stupidly, I chose the name Laughing Crass as the mythical band. But yes, as you say, at one point, I think we were smuggling into Las Vegas and transiting in New York. The shipment was transited in New York, and one amplifier was left behind. And I think a sniffer dog sniffed it. They rumbled what was going on.
And so, at what point did you start earning seriously big money?
About that point. But it became a lot more. But it was definitely serious amounts of money at that time. I mean, the deals just got bigger and bigger, and from different countries to various other different countries. And I suppose it culminated in my smuggling 15 tons of Colombian marijuana into Western Scotland, which I think is still the largest shipment of marijuana into Western Europe. You know, I mean, it might have been surpassed, I don't know. Certainly the largest one that they knew about. And, you know, that was, well, it wasn't the biggest deal I ever did, but it was the biggest deal I ever did to Europe.
Was it easier in those days, or was there different difficulties?
Yes, It was easier without a doubt. I mean, I think it still requires the same sort of character to do it as it did then, but the goalposts have definitely shifted. I mean, the main difference, I think, is the gap in technology. In those days, we had better, faster cars, and they had faster boats, and they had, you know, more sophisticated electronic machinery, scanners and things. Now, the gap in technology between, I'm going to say them and us at the risk, but is so horrendous. You know, you can't now. They have so much better technology than any door dealer can have. So, yes, it's a different game, but probably requires the same characters.
Okay, so we spoke about the exhilaration, the rush you must get from it, but what about the fear when you're doing these massive deals and you're realizing, and you're doing more and more and more and more, and this is what you're doing, and all of a sudden you start assembling different identities, which we'll probably come to in a bit, but at what point did you start thinking, law of averages, eventually I'm going to get caught and the punishment is going to be severe?
That occurred to me several times, and I mean, I dealt, well, I'll carry on until either I get busted or I drop dead. I think this is my destiny. I think this is what I'm meant to do. I will carry on doing it, as I say, until I get busted or until I drop dead. Hoping, of course, I'd never get busted and live to a ripe old age, but, you know, it didn't work out like that.
And can I just ask about when you were recruited by MI6 to be a spy, because that's sort of like James Bond, John le Carré territory. How did that happen?
It happened as a result of my friendship with someone at Oxford. We were contemporaries, exact contemporaries, and we're often thrown together because, I mean, my name was Marx, his name was Macmillan, and therefore we were often put into the same group alphabetically, you know, to read essays to the master or attend various, like, tutorials, things like that. And he was recruited while he was a student. I didn't know this at the time, but he was recruited then, and that's, you know, usually where people were recruited from Oxbridge. And years after, he came to see me in Oxford, where I had a clothes shop, which is basically a money laundering thing. I was really smuggling a load of dope, but came to the clothes shop and recruited me. And I, of course, thought, oh, this is great, you know, I'm suddenly not being given a license to kill, of course, not, you know, but a license to deal and smuggle at least, surely, you know. So I said yes, you know, I would happily be recruited.
And what kind of information, because you're famously not a grass, and you've never grassed anyone, so what kind of information were you providing them with?
Not providing them with information so much as safe houses and sort of letter drops, things that they could use for their own purposes, which didn't lead anywhere other than to me. So a fall guy, I think.
And can I ask, maybe you don't want to say, but when you were making the big money, was it like millions upon millions that were flooding in?
Yes, it was a colossal amount of money. It was millions and millions. I mean, there was never a sort of point where you'd think you'd cash in or how much it was worth. I could be sort of owing several millions one day and picking up several millions the next, which would all be profit. It was a colossal amount of money, but it did swing up and down.
Wow. And so, coming up to getting busted, so was the high point sort of in the mid-70s? Was that, say, maybe a 2-year period where you were in America, were you?
Yes, I mean, the greatest amount of money I made was in the late 70s when I was working with the mafia in New York. Yeah. I mean, the other thing is, it's not that sort of like drug dealing or drug smuggling is particularly a sort of, you know, within the domain of the mafia. I mean, if you go to the top of any business, you're very likely to meet the mafia, you know, because they're there. And I was on the way to the top of the cannabis business and met the mafia. And
the
Gambino family it was. I mean, the Gambino family, they're one of the 5 major families in New York, but they're the ones that have control over Queens, the borough of Queens. which is where JF Kennedy Airport is situated. So that's why it was the Gambino family. And I found them very, very easy to deal with. I mean, they construct the deal in such a way that they can't be ripped off anyway. Even if you were stupid enough to want to rip them off, you couldn't. I mean, they would just take 25% of the load, give me 75%. He said, okay, sell that. When you've sold it, we'll give you the other 25%, for money. So I never ripped them off. I found them absolutely honourable. I was fascinated with the mafia as a kid, and felt I was fulfilling some kind of childhood fantasy dealing with them.
So I guess it would be safe to say that you felt as if you were living in a kind of action thriller movie for some time. Your life almost became a fantasy.
Yes, it did. I mean, apart from sort of working for the same firm as James Bond, and dealing with sort of highest mafia people in the world, yes, of course I thought that, yeah. I mean, I began to think I was invulnerable, till I got busted. I think if I hadn't got busted, I'd have been a right twat for the rest of my life.
And so, building up to getting busted, I think at one point you're being tailed by quite a lot as the DEA are onto you, and you must tell us about your multiple identities. Because in the book there's a picture of all the passports you had. Did that get a bit existentially confusing with all those passports?
No, it didn't. I'm not. Is this working? Take my time? Okay. Thank you.
It's working.
What was the question?
Yes, good question. What was the question? Yes, Mr. Nice and all the many identities.
I had to go on the run. No, I didn't have to. I decided to go on the run rather than go to prison. So for about 6 years I was on the run. I was a fugitive from, as I called injustice, but probably justice. And made some attempts to change my appearance. I mean, nothing dramatic. I mean, I didn't go for Botox, even though sort of plastic surgery or anything like that. I would part my hair this way, part my hair that way, grow my hair long, cut it, grow a beard, grow a moustache, just things that everyone does anyway. But using those very, very simple ways of changing my appearance, I became known by the media as a master of disguise. I'm reading a newspaper, a master of disguise. What the hell are they talking about? I mean, yes, of course I'd get up every morning, I'd go to the bathroom, well, that's me with the side part in that way, that's me with the side part in that way, that's me with the moustache, that's me with the beard, but it's still me, why are they calling me a master of disguise? And I thought, they tried to lure me into a feeling of false self-confidence, as if they're trying to draw me out. So I stayed in for another year. And finally sort of hit on a sort of what I thought was a brilliant idea that I know I'll get a pair of glasses. Disguise myself properly now. I'll not take it seriously. I'll get a pair of glasses. And I borrowed some of my friends' glasses, and but I couldn't see through them. I'd feel sick or giddy or something. And there's no way you could buy a pair of glasses. No way you could buy a pair of plain glasses. Obviously, I mean, the demand for plain glasses is very small. There wasn't even an internet thing you could say, where can I buy a pair of plain glasses? They just weren't on sale. So this was becoming much more difficult than I thought. And then by chance, I suppose, I was reading an article, I'm not sure now if it was in a scientific magazine or an early head shop magazine, I can't remember. But it said in it that if you smoked enough or a lot of strong hashish, you would temporarily contract the condition known as presbyopia, okay? Long sight, okay? Okay. So I smoked as much strong hash as I could, sort of over and over again, joint after joint, until nothing but hash remained, and went to the opticians. So like absolutely wavering into it. I could hardly walk and said, oh, I think I might need a pair of glasses. And so he sort of put me through this series of tests that any optician does, you know, read letters, decreasing sizes, he put drops in my eyes and shone lights into there and did usual tests and said, yes, you do need a pair of glasses. Oh, great. You know. Give me this pair of glasses through which I could only see through if I was completely spanned. I couldn't see a thing through them otherwise. Which didn't stop them being very useful, you know, completely spanned all the time. But, so I did get a satisfactory disguise. Yeah.
And how did you become Mr. Nice?
I bought a lot of passports from the criminal underground and, you know, some schemes and everything. I acquired a lot of passports. I would change them about every 3 months. And Mr. Nice, because you've got no choice generally. Very rarely do you have a choice in what name you can have on the passport. You just buy what's going. And by chance, I bought a passport of a guy who called himself Donald Nice, but Nice was spelled like nice was. And so I quite liked that passport. It was very, very handy sort of to be called Mr. Nice, because people immediately think you're nice. And the reason I chose it as the title of the book was just to be provocative, actually.
And so, well, there's so many questions to ask you, and I want to give the audience as much chance as possible. So can we just get to the point at which you busted?
Yes, well, I've been busted 3 times.
Maybe the last one where
get bail and disappear and go on the run. The second time I got acquitted, even though I was obviously guilty. After a 9-week Old Bailey trial, the jury decided that there wasn't enough evidence to support the charge, so I got acquitted. I took that as a direct message from God, really, to carry on smuggling. So I carried on smuggling. And then, to the point you get in that thing, I mean, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration of America, decided, okay, enough's enough. You know, we're gonna get him. And they spearheaded, I think about 14 law enforcement departments of 14 different countries, and just were determined to get me, and succeeded in busting me. But they didn't manage to bust any hash. They didn't catch anything that they could relate to me. But a lot of people started grasping. There was a lot of embarrassing evidence to try to explain, lots of phone taps and everything. And it was a rap I couldn't beat, basically. They won. And I got sentenced to 25 years in prison. But I got out after 7, so it's kind of a result, really.
Yes, absolutely. And well, the part in the book where you describe getting busted, you know, it goes into a lot. Being in jail. It goes into a lot of detail, and it's really quite harrowing to read. It sounds like almost Orwellian. And didn't they make you watch television? It seems from, remember you mentioned where you found 1984 in the prison library, which you felt was an accurate description of your circumstances, and you sort of had no freedom. You were just sort of bombarded in there. It was a very harsh prison, wasn't it?
Yes, it was a very harsh regime there, in many ways. I mean, not in all ways. It's the only federal prison with a death row. I mean, state prisons have them, but this is the only federal prison with a death row. So that, you know, imparts a certain kind of vibe to the whole place, which is difficult to deal with sometimes. But I didn't find survival that difficult there. I think largely because I didn't have to show allegiance to a particular gang. You know, I mean, I might as well have come from Mars, really. I mean, I wasn't an outlaw, I wasn't a Hell's Angel, I wasn't part of the Vice Lords, I wasn't part of the Bloods, I wasn't part of the Crips, I was from Mars. So that made it easier. Plus, I I stopped taking myself too seriously, too. I mean, I just realized I'd been a bit of an idiot all my life, taking myself too seriously. And now I was actually in a position that I could help people. You know, I could help them to pass an English examination. I could write to their girlfriends for them. I was a jailhouse lawyer. I could get them time off their sentences, everything. So survival wasn't that difficult. And I think in many ways it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm not suggesting anyone should check in. But you know, I don't see it as a case for tragedy or sympathy. I see it as a very rewarding experience when I look back on it.
Okay, so Chris, how are we doing for time? Okay, so you come out of jail after 5 years, and sorry, 7, and then you write your autobiography, Mr. Nice, and find a publisher. And were you surprised by how massively successful and even iconic it became as a book?
Yes, I mean, the quick answer to that is yes, but what made me write, it's not something I wrote while I was in prison or wrote when I came out. It's something I wrote simply because I was offered an enormous amount of money if I agreed to do it by a publisher. It's what's called going straight. And I was astonished, you know, to get back to the main point of the question, I was totally astonished by its success. Largely because, you know, when anyone writes, they have some sort of target audience in mind. And I thought I was writing for fellow geriatrics, you know, to sort of give them a sense of nostalgia or try to inject some glamour into their shit-ridden lives, you know. I don't think too many of those bought it, you know, but their kids did. And of course, I'm not suggesting having entirely the wrong target audience in mind is the way to write a bestseller, but it worked for me, so I was absolutely astonished by its success. Yeah.
Wow, and so coming out of jail, you knew you couldn't get back into smuggling. Even did you sort of try at one point?
Yes.
Straight away?
Yes, I thought, yeah, well, you know, the time to get back into it is right away, when they think you're still suffering from a cell shock or something like that, you know, just bang it to it there and then, you know. But I couldn't find any partners. I mean, they were, you know, just no one. Everyone thought I was just nuts.
And did you suspect coming out of jail that you could have just been a has-been then? You know, you've been dealing drugs the whole time and you come out of jail, but you have found this extraordinary career as a writer and doing kind of stand-up shows all over the place. I mean, were you expecting that, you know, all these years after coming out of jail that, you know, people would respect you as this sort of glamorous outlaw figure and writer and performer?
Never occurred to me for a single second.
We didn't suspect it would. But it must be a pleasant surprise.
Oh, it's wonderful, you know. I mean, I feel terribly lucky and terribly well blessed that all that stuff happened, and it is still happening in some sort of way.
To what extent do you think? Well, I mean, what is the appeal of the outlaw, of the rebel? Because that's obviously what you're seen as because of your extensive career as a drug smuggler and the time you spent in jail. Well, why do you think it is that we kind of respect and admire and see people in that way as being so cool?
Well, the original meaning of outlaw is not someone who breaks the law, it's someone who lives outside of the law. A bit like a dropout. You know, okay, just leave me the fuck alone. You know, I won't take anything from you, I won't give you anything. And I was very pleased to realize that the first ever outlaw, who was called an outlaw, was Hereward the Wake, which of course is where the name Howard comes from, so oh yeah, we're on to one here. And I think that if you make your own laws and abide by them, that is a much stronger person than just taking whatever is handed down from whatever so-called authority and just obey it. I think to make your own laws and stick to them is very sad. And an outlaw has no choice but to do that.
Well, on that note, I want to give as much time for questions as possible. So now we're going to have an interval. Please go to the bar and buy more alcohol. And come back and feel free to ask Howard any questions you want, but please give Mr. Nice, Howard Marks,